Cool. I want to say hello to everyone, and let's start our community call and ask me anything session. Last week we had a real nice conversation with Kevin Awoke, about Sybil-Resistance and the experience that they had with BrightID and what they're doing in Gitcoin. And we thought it's a good idea to continue this conversation this week and deeper into the rabbit hole and see what's going on, no puns intended. I think that the person who would start the conversation would be Adam, and then we're gonna bombard him with questions and start a conversation with each other.
Yeah, so thank you, Pascal. Thank you for that introduction. The core of BrightID is to root out Sybils. That's what it's about. It's about to limit the damage that can be done by people that are creating duplicate accounts. And it's very much a social experiment. It depends on the activities of everybody that's involved. It can't just be, it's different from something like a government organization that says, okay, we're going to be the people with guns that guard the gate, and you have to prove to us that it's like that you're following the rules, otherwise you don't get in, and we're going to monitor you, fingerprint you, whatever we need to do. It tries to get away from that model. We don't even believe that model is even very effective, and we're trying to push that the verification as far to the edges as we can, so that it's really the people that that are verifying you. Now we have a journey to get there, because at the beginning, someone who's brand new to BrightID doesn't know very many people. So our starting point that many of you are already familiar with is that we have a very basic level of Sybil-Resistance, which is effective at rooting out and preventing large scale Sybil attacks. So you can't just sit there with a script creating tons of accounts. But because you have to find someone you already know, it's not as far to the edges as we want it to be yet. There's still basically a select group of people that are orchestrating the connection making and overseeing it and making sure that things go well. But eventually, what we want is the process that I would like to see in the future is you connect to your friends and family or close relatives, and you get verified. And that's what BrightID is. That's what BrightID should be. So the conversation I would like to have is, how do we get from where we are now to that point? And it's very interesting, and there's lots of different cool ideas. And so I think we can start there. But first, I just want to open it up for questions. Do people understand what a Sybil attack is? Do they understand what a Sybil is? Do they understand the problem that we're solving with BrightID? Those sorts of questions. So I'll just open it up for those to begin with, or any question at all. Yes.
I want to. It's sort of a addition to what you just said, and based on the experience that I've had with talking to the people and onboarding people to BrightID and making connections to them, I think there's a very small but natural misconception to BrightID. People think that BrightID gives them Web3 identity. I think BrightID is a very small, specific linchpin into the identity mechanism, but it's not identity. What BrightID is a unique identifier, just making sure that you have this only account, and then based on that, we can build a reputation, add information if you want to. But BrightID itself is just making sure that this is your unique account. You're a unique person in this environment. And I think that's something that people should understand. And yeah, I want to know what you think of a Sibyl in that sense. My idea is that me having an account somewhere with a reputation, but having another account on the side, which I just reserve for myself, so that if something goes wrong with this one, I keep using the other one. Or if there is something that is being distributed and I get one share, now I have this other one that I get another share. That's civil to me, but I think it's more than that, and I want to know how that would work. What are other instances of being a Sybil using an application?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a reason why you're the spokesperson for BrightID. You do a very good job of explaining what BrightID is and what it does. And you're right, it's not identity. Even though it's called BrightID, it's not identity, it's uniqueness. That's what we're all about. And I've thought about it over the past couple of years, like, okay, can we rebrand to make that more clear? But the funny thing is we're kind of playing into this a little bit of the confusion that exists around that by choosing the name BrightID for this system, because yeah, because it kind of pulls people in that have that confusion, and then helps them understand what it is that they actually need, because they think, a lot of people that come and find BrightID, they think they need a full identity solution like you're talking about. And then they realize, oh, wait, I don't actually need that. I just need the uniqueness. I don't even need people's email addresses like most Web2 services are collecting. All I need is to make a brand new unique identifier for this person. And it's by the way, your BrightID itself, which is an identifier, a unique identifier, is not even shared with the applications that you use. We have a clever way to allow them to assign you a new unique identifier. And then that's what's used to determine your uniqueness, with the BrightID graph underpinning that. So yeah, it's all about figuring out how can we prove uniqueness with sharing the least amount of private information that we can. And I think that's the approach that's going to win out. That's the approach that people are going to feel the best about. I mean, people are already feeling nervous about Facebook and Google and things like that. I think in the long term, once people see that there's a solution that doesn't need so much of their private information, they will latch onto that and enjoy using that. So, but as far as like, so the question that you asked is then what is a Sybil? And I kind of compartmentalize into two different types of Sybil attacks. One is like the computer hacker who can look at BrightID, can take it completely apart and say, okay, I see how the verification process is working. I see how all these different pieces are working, and I can run a program and I can try to do certain things. And that attacker, it's the same sort of attacker that might try to do something like write a script to register a bunch of times on your website. So that attacker, that's one type of Sybil attack, and that attacker is slowed down by, there's a lot of different things you can do to slow down an attacker like that. But then another Sybil attack is what you were talking about, which is what if I create another account and I use it as a backup account, and then I want my backup account to get 2 UBIs or something like that, so that I can have twice as much. And this is very much a social problem, because the success or failure of a system that's trying to prevent that depends very much on the people around you caring more about the being on the side of the the system or the platform succeeding rather than being on your side of getting extra for you. So if people feel like they're winning or they're succeeding, if they get more Sybils for themselves and their friends, and that's kind of the social norm, then BrightID fails, because everybody's going to be trying to do that, and it's just a race to see how many Sybils you can get, and if everyone feels like they're doing a good job by getting more, then it breaks down. But if people feel like, okay, I like you, but I like you, Paslar, but I can't let you have those pretend children. It's just like doesn't feel good to me. It feels yucky. I'm sorry, buddy. And it, and I think part of it has to do with like, do we, I think part of it has to do with like, what incentives or what skin can we give people in the game for making the entire game succeed? There has to be that, and that doesn't exist in BrightID yet, but I think it needs to exist. So people need to have some way that they can reward themselves for basically like calling out Sybils where there are Sybils, or calling out honest users where there are honest users, and making those assessments. And I don't think it's going to be every user that's motivated or capable of doing this. We don't need every user to be doing that, but we do need some sort of system like that. And then, once that's in place, and it's kind of like almost this like decentralized, like it's almost like a neighborhood watch, I guess you could say. So, if you're trying to get Sybils and you rely on your neighborhood to get verified, either for real accounts or Sybil accounts, and you've got a neighborhood watch, and they're like, no, I know we would love to each have an extra account and get twice the UBI or whatever, but no, we're part of the neighborhood watch, and we're not going to let that happen. So if we can have that sort of system in place, then we can succeed. So it's an interesting game to get from where we are now, where it feels like, we don't have that neighborhood watch in place yet, to where we do. It'll be an interesting journey to get there. And right now we have communities that have seeds. And so you basically go, and that's kind of your neighborhood watch, is these existing communities, usually around an app. So you may go to like the creators or the kind of like community leaders for the application, and BrightID certainly plays a role in this at this early stage. You go to the leaders of those communities, and they kind of oversee the verification process. The problem there is with these online communities that are, rapidly scaling up, you can't really, you don't know everybody. That's the problem. It's not like a real neighborhood watch where it's like, okay, someone just moved into the neighborhood, let's get to know them, let's bring them a plate of cookies. And there's a little bit of that goes on in communities, but it's definitely there. Like, we see people showing up at connection parties for BrightID where it's just like, okay, how do I get my thing in 5 minutes? Like, I want, get me in, get me out. I want my verification so I can get the thing I want. And that's totally understandable. It makes sense from like the point of view of a user. That's what they want. So how do we transition from that into something that's like perhaps a slower process, but in the end, it won't be a slower process, because it's like, okay, I'm just connecting to my friends and family. And, by the time I imagine it happening with kids. So by the time you're old enough to understand what you're getting from BrightID, you're probably already verified, because your relatives already did it for you. So that's the road that we have ahead, and it's really interesting. Like, it's a really interesting topic to discuss. So yeah, let's see what we want to talk about. Okay, so someone asked, so if I get verified, can I verify others? Is that how it works? or if only certain personnel have the access to verify. So that's, yeah, so Suleiman Khan asked that, and that's exactly the topic that we're on, is how can we get there to where it's in like a trustworthy way, you can verify the people that you know, rather than like going to a community, like a trusted community. So right now we have seeds that will get people verified. So you would have to, like, someone has to go to one of these seeds, either a BrightID connection party or a connection party from one of the other communities that has these trusted seeds in it that allow people to get verified. And what we want to explore is how can we push the seed power out to the edges, so that just normal people who are doing a good job, who are viewed as honest actors in the system, can just sort of automatically just gain that seed power to be able to help to verify other people just through their own actions, so that you wouldn't even have to bring someone to a connection party. So like if you're lucky enough to be Poslar's wife, then like you don't have to come to a connection party, you just connect to Poslar. But there's very few people with that power, and what we want to do is expand it so that there's a lot more people with that sort of power.
Yeah, so I'd say that the answer is today you need to connect to one of the people that has that power. Another interesting thing about BrightID is that right now there are only a few algorithms running on the system, and they use that specific set of people. But in the future, there can be all sorts of different algorithms and all different sorts of groups that have that power. So right now it's sort of centralized in that way, but it's not meant to be. If this is broadly successful, there could be wildly different groups that know nothing about each other that have power in different algorithms. So it's not trying to be one universal answer over everything. It's a neutral playground that all sorts of experiments can be tried.
Yeah. And Shailendra Singh asks, I lost my mobile and connecting once again. Is it okay with the new mobile? Yes. So I think once you've vested a certain amount of time in BrightID, it's certainly beneficial to go through social recovery, which is bring a few people that you really trust. So this is actually what we think is going to be the starting point for what we've been talking about, where people can help to verify other people. So this is a really important step. So make sure you do this. Bring some people that you really trust and really know in real life onto BrightID, connect with them, and choose recovery connection for your connection level with them. It's the highest, strongest level of connection that you can make in BrightID. We need more connections like this. This is what BrightID lacks right now, is these really strong connections between existing relationships, those types of connections. So once you've chosen 3 people and set them up as your recovery connection, then in the future, when you need to switch devices or whatever, all you do is reconnect to 2 of them on your new device, and you'll get everything back. It's a very simple process once you've set that up. Setting it up right now is, you've got to get those people that you trust. You've got to get them to use BrightID, and then just tell them what you're doing. Tell them that it's going to help you recover, and get them to help you do that. And that if that's how this is going to grow. That's how this system is going to grow, where we have these really strong connections that are people connecting to people that they already know, using them to help recover their BrightID when they need to. They become the guardians of your identity. That's what the BrightID system is supposed to be about. It's kind of like social guardianship of your identity. You rather than having a government entity say, okay, I'm the guardian or controller of your identity. It's people that you pick, that you know, that you have existing relationships with, that you trust. You choose them to be the guardian of your identity. Once most people are doing this, and we have a bunch of these strong connections, then we can advance to these better algorithms that can allow, just normal people to get other people verified. So that's what we're going for. like I said, this is a social experiment. And so part of the experiment is, can we get people to do that? Can we get people to set up social recovery connections and make these stronger connections to people that they already know? Because right now there's a quick and easy way to get verified. It's not as effective as the other way, but it's a quick way. And most people take the quick way, and that's fine. That's what we expect. But we also want people, after they've taken the quick way, to go back and do the stronger way. And that starts, like, what can you do? How can you move this forward? Make those recovery connections, like get those real people that you really trust and make those recovery connections with them. Yeah, so Jordan pointed out at least 3 people, but you only need 2 of those 3 to recover. Yep. Yeah. Need to know at least 2 people personally to recover in the future, just in case I lose access to everything interesting. Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. So not only does that allow you to recover everything, but it sets the stage that we're looking for the evolution of BrightID, for this stronger BrightID.
And I'll point out, if you actually did set up social recovery and you really do know how to contact, you remember who you selected, and they still have their BrightID, if those things are true, the process is super fast and easy. It's not at all difficult. The problems all come when people don't remember who they chose, the other people didn't keep their BrightIDs. That's the difficulty. But if you actually know who to go to and they have it, if Paslar lost his, we could recover his account in 2 minutes. It is super easy because he knows who his people are and they all have their BrightID. That the actual operation is very simple.
Okay, let's let Super Fizz ask his question.
Yeah, so when I set up my account, I store all of my passwords in a KeyPass database, and that version of the database got corrupted, and so I had to back up. And so whether it was my own stupidity or what, that's the only password that I know that I lost, and it's one of those that I don't know how to get back. Does the social recovery enable the recovery of, so I love the graph, the Explorer, but I can't log into it anymore. Does social recovery enable that?
Yeah, well, you're in luck because, okay, so let's try this right now and see if it works for you. Go to your BrightID and go to the menu. Don't hold this up to the screen because this is private just for you. But go to the left-hand menu and go to edit profile. It's kind of hidden. I wish it were more clear. We should probably fix this. But if you go to edit profile,
it's there now. I'm sorry.
It's there. It's just right there.
Yeah,
we don't try to make it. We don't try to make this password hard to find. It should be really easy to find and change. And the reason is because that password does not allow someone to steal your BrightID. When I said that the guardianship of your BrightID is the people that you trust, those people that you select, that's really what it is. And we need to do a better job of getting the word out that that's what BrightID is all about. But those are the people that are going to help you recover. This password is actually just to encrypt or hide the names and photos, so that there's not a data leak somewhere. We don't have centralized servers. We don't want to make this information public about the names and photos that you're collecting on your phone. So what we do is we have a password. That's your password to encrypt it and decrypt it when the time comes. So if you were to recover on another device and you had forgotten the password, you could still do it. You would just be missing a lot of your connection list, and you could rebuild it over time by reconnecting to people, but you'd be missing chunks of your, and that's all. So you can even do the social recovery even if you forget your password. But you're right, you can't use the Explorer. But luckily you can just go over to the menu and see, well, what was my password? What was my Explorer code? And you should be fine.
And to be clear,
I'm so happy that this is going to make my day now that I can see my connections again.
Yeah, and even if you did lose out on some of those, the connect from the blockchain's perspective, from the graph perspective, the connections are all still there. You just can't see the names and photos, but the connections still exist from a graph analysis.
And that's what I had my account name And I've been guessing, like, I think that person is this, and I think that person is that, and that person is a seed, and they have a recovery link, so they must be this person. So this is great to have.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is something to be careful about. That even though, so we never make any strong claims about anonymity in BrightID, even though we do say that we are not collecting data and it's decentralized and there's no server with your data sitting on it. There's no honeypot like that. And like BrightID itself tries to discourage apps from collecting user data. I mean, obviously they can do it on their own, but just not in conjunction with BrightID. So we're not out there collecting data, but some people might get a false sense of security, kind of like the false sense of security people got with early Bitcoin. They're like, oh, Bitcoin's anonymous, right? I can just like buy all kinds of illegal stuff and I won't get caught. No, actually, it's like probably easier to trace your transactions with Bitcoin than something else. So with BrightID, yeah, that data is not floating around, but you can still, like a government or a Google or a Facebook or something could look at the BrightID graph and start to put the pieces together and say, okay, well, we can look at our graph or the information we have and we can compare it to this and we can see, okay, that actually we can like figure out most of these people and who they are. So do be careful about that. I would say don't make a connection in BrightID if you're not comfortable with it. So like if you're, if you go to a connection party, feel free to mark everybody as suspicious. Like that's not going to actually affect your personal verification. You're mostly there to be connecting with the host or this person with the seed trust. So, make that connection, trust that person, but like the other stuff, just do what you're comfortable with. Yeah, Philip.
Adam, you're kind of talking to Superfizz right now. Now, Superfizz is part of a seed, so I don't want him to go marking people randomly as suspicious.
Okay, so there's something that we found out about that I was actually schooled on, which is so I as a seed person, because I also have seed powers, I can mark people suspicious, and it doesn't that by itself, so it won't get them verified, but it also won't get them unverified if that's what we're worried about. So I actually have to go one step further and give a reason for reporting them. So once you mark someone suspicious, then the app will come back later and ask you why you marked them as suspicious, and you can give a reason, and then that actually reports them. So there's a stronger level called report that's stronger than suspicious, and that will actually unverify people if you're a seed. So yeah, you do have to be aware that when you mark someone as suspicious, if you're a seed, they're not going to get verified. If you report them, they can actually get unverified. Does that clarify some things there?
That should be a very rare, well, at least given our current trust in the system, it should be more or less rare, right? Like I don't think I found anyone that's suspicious.
Well, if you're on the front lines, you'll see.
Yeah, well,
like,
and I'm not Paslar and Mona Mesa, like.
Right. So they see people trying to scam on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So
most of the people I see are people that I've known for months or years. So
right. Yeah, right. We wouldn't expect many of those people to be attacking. Yeah, we're also working on ideas that will give power users more flexibility in the ways to label things. So we've recently started working with Raid Guild to build out a game, and it's not expected that everybody plays it, but if people that do care and do have information. So if you've known someone a long time and you deeply trust them, like you'll be able to mark it in such a way and sort of like bet on, yeah, this account is valid now and will be valid far in the future because I actually know this dude. Or, hey, I know this guy is trying to scam. I would like to sort of bet against this account. So really interested to see
that gamification In fact, I remembered I was in December, I was thinking about ways to gamify BrightID.
Yes.
That when I talk to my local friends and I'm like, you guys, you should sign up with BrightID. They're like, but it doesn't do anything. And I'm like, oh, that's not the point.
Exactly.
It's, identity, it's identity verification. They're like, but it doesn't do anything. I look at the app and I close it and I don't do anything. And so the gamified perspective, I think, will be a game change. Is that a pun? It'll be a game changer for BrightID. I really look forward to getting engaged with that.
Yeah, I think the gamification will be great. But what you mentioned is exactly the paradox that we're struggling with right now, which is you want to bring your already known connections in, your strong connections, like your friends and family, your close people. You want to bring them into BrightID, but they don't have a reason. Sometimes they do, but usually they don't. So the people you end up making connections with on BrightID are people that do have a reason, but that you don't know very well. So they're interested, they share the common interest of wanting to use the apps that you can do with BrightID right now. But they're probably not going to be your close friends or relatives. So you've got to like do a little bit of arm twisting or something to just say like, hey, help me out here. It's just for my benefit right now that you're making this connection on BrightID with me so that I can recover in the future. And just so I can have more connections and just have a stronger BrightID graph. But it'll get much easier in the future when everybody does have a little something that they want to use BrightID for. Like, your parents and your relatives will say, you can show them all the apps and they'll find one, at least one that's like worth their time to sign up for BrightID. That'll make it so much easier.
I'm not sure if Super and other guests are aware that with the latest update, you can't just select anyone as a recovery connection. You're only able to select people that have selected you as already known. So like no one can like select me as a recovery connection. Yep. When I selected them as people that I just met. So that makes recovery connections much more meaningful.
That avoids some user error. That people, making inappropriate recovery connections. So that is a really helpful change. I see a question here that I want to answer. It says, if a platform is looking to accomplish basic user authentication, user account creation. So when you use that word, so can you use BrightID? So I think if I understand correctly, and you can correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but I think what you're looking for is like a login with BrightID, right? Is that like, can I just use BrightID as my login rather than an email or something for my user base? Is that kind of the question? So if that is the question, yes, you can do that. I would be careful about calling it authentication, because you're not, like we said with BrightID, you know that you're getting the same person, but you don't know anything about that person. So, like, what does that mean in terms of authentication? I mean, it's very limited in what you can do, but what a lot of applications find out is they don't need to collect a lot of personal information about their users. They just don't need it. And so, yes, what you do is you create a new identifier. You can use UUIDs or whatever to create a unique identifier. Then you allow the person to make a link in their app to your app. So I'll show you what it looks like on BrightID. Right now, BrightID is the only way to do this, the BrightID mobile app. But you make a link, so I can choose one of these apps. I'm actually linked to all of them. There's like some weird bug because I did this a long time ago that doesn't show me linked to some of these. But let's say that there's one I wasn't linked to yet, and I scan a code. It just looks like a normal, QR code that I would scan. I scan it, and then it pops up and it says, "Do you want to make a link to your app on BrightID?" It'll ask them that question. Generating that link QR code. It's both. They can either click on the link if they're on their mobile device, or they can scan it if they're scanning a laptop. Creating that is really easy to do. If you go to dev.brightid.org, I'll paste that in the chat, but dev.brightid.org, it tells some of the basic steps to creating that. There's also 2 SDKs that'll make it even easier to create that for you. So you create a universal link. You create the identifier that goes in that universal link. Users connect to the app, and then they've essentially logged in with BrightID. You don't know what their BrightID identifier is, but you know that whenever you see that person that you've identified with that identifier, that it's going to be the same person. And so that gets you this very basic, like that type of authentication. Like, I don't know anything about this person, but I know it's the same person. And for, like I said, for a lot of apps, that's exactly the level they need. They don't need to go any further than that.
And that BrightID user does not have another account on your system.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're getting from that. So yes, if that's what you want, if that's what you care about, the other thing that you get is the user can be allowed to change their identifier with you. So let's say that someone comes to your application and starts the whole process over because they lost access or whatever. So they start the whole process over and create a new account and get a new identifier. When they come back to your application and log in again, it will show you a list. Like they get assigned verification from one of the BrightID nodes that tells what their context ID is, but they can't escape the context IDs that they used in the past with your application. So the context ID is the unique identifier that you created. They can't escape the ones they used in the past. So let's say that you're a chat app and you want to just have a very basic chat app. You're not trying to collect personal information, but everyone has a unique identifier that may or may not be public depending on how you set it up. So if someone wants to be a bad actor and they get banned and then they want to come back with BrightID, you would see, okay, they've got this unique identifier, so they just signed up, but then they also have these other ones that they used in the past. They can't run away from those. So that's what you get. So if that's something you want for your application, yeah, just come over to our Discord and talk to us, or our Keybase. We have both, and we'll start the process with you, setting up your application to use that. Okay, so other questions? Okay, I think we're getting pretty close to time. There are some interesting things in the roadmap that get pretty deep into some of the changes we want to do, and also Philip alluded to a game that is really interesting, and I would love once we have a prototype built, it would be cool to do an AMA on, or just, it wouldn't really be an AMA, it would almost be more like a demo. It could be like a demo to the community, like, here's this cool prototype we have, come check it out. And we would want some power users to try it out. So I think there's definitely some more directions we could go, but.
Are the mechanics of that worked out? The mechanics of the game?
I wondered. No, definitely not. In
Philip's
fact,
like, no, and Adam's like, yeah. I was kidding.
Well, no, definitely not. I mean, I have some ideas, but yeah. I think one of our goals for this game is we want to provide scaffolding so that users can give information, and then there's we want there to be lots of different interpretations of how to use that data, and so we want a bunch of competing games basically and the best game will win out type of thing.
Yeah, super. So I sort of see it as this 3-layer thing. So this first MVP is just provide a way that we can, an MVP of how users can provide that information up a level. And then we use that to what I think will be to create the most accurate analysis on BrightID that node now has, and applications could query it. And then we create a prediction market Uniswap kind of platform where different nodes can compete with each other. So there could be multiple different games, different ways to do it. But this is just the first way that a user says, "This is what I have to add to the conversation." But that's all like one user only has like this much of an opinion on the graph, but the node can have a big opinion, and then the nodes themselves can compete with each other in this open prediction market.
Sounds exciting. Yeah, I can't wait. That is gonna be probably one of my highlights for the year. So when that starts unfolding, I can't wait to talk about it everywhere.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. So
one of the things that I've been wondering is how can we, with that game and BrightID in general, how can we suck in information about already existing social graphs? Whether that's Twitter and Facebook or Proof of Humanity and IDENA. How can we vampire attack all of those systems to like pull that in without everyone having to doing everything on BrightID? There's a bunch of good stuff already there. Like you do some of it on BrightID, but a lot of it you can just vampire attack in.
And then also without triggering users that they feel like they've been taken advantage of for information in some way, which is also, that careful balance.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I wrote a post on, and I talked about it a little bit at the beginning of this call, on how to import seed power, because the goal is to push that to the edges and not have it like a slow, clunky system for adding new seed groups, but rather more organic system where you can kind of bring your own seed power into the graph. I think the graph analysis still needs to happen on the BrightID graph on that, because the connections that are being made in BrightID, we're very careful about. That's what a lot of the project has been, is just monitoring user behavior and being really careful about the types of connections people are making. Are they doing it correctly? Those types of things, setting up the right social structure for this to exist. But if you're doing something like Twitter, to me I've tried to look at it from lots of different ways and say, okay, can we use this? And the answer keeps coming up, no. Something like Proof of Humanity, though, like I look at that and I think, okay, there's some really interesting stuff there that makes it much higher quality than Twitter. First of all, you've got to stake money, like you've got some skin in the game. That's going to already set a much higher bar for Sybil attacks. And then whether or not like scrutinizing someone's face and, did they take a good photograph, or did they provide enough information, or does the video look real? Like that, I'm not so sure about that, but the fact that it's this graph that's trying to be a registry of humanity, people are scrutinizing it for that specifically, and there's stake, like that you have to put some money down on it. That gives it a high enough value that I'm thinking, like, yes, that you could say, okay, I'm going to take my Proof of Humanity and import that anonymously into BrightID and gain some seed power by doing that. And that way, now I become a center of trust that I can spread out this seed power in BrightID, rather than going through the process of setting up a seed community or something like that and getting passed off by the seed DAO or whatever the process is right now. So I think that's very interesting. But again, there's different levels. And if you go to forum.brightid.org, you can see there's an article called Importing Trust. And that one, that's where I talk about, like, I give a bunch of examples of ones that I think could work. I don't give examples of ones that I think couldn't work, like Twitter. If someone comes up with a way, maybe like if you look at, but most people don't have this, so it's kind of not that great. But if whatever the process is, I don't know what it is because I don't have one, but you know that like fancy little check mark some people have on Twitter, maybe whatever that process is trustworthy enough that could give you seed power. I don't know, maybe. But it's those types of things. But like just having a Twitter account, probably not.
So like here's the thing. So, you know, when people follow me on Twitter, I have few enough followers that I click on their little icons and like see who they are. And sometimes I look and I go like, that sure looks like a real person. I don't know if they're a unique person, but like that is seeming like a real person. And half the time I click on it and I go, that is totally not a real person. That is bullshit. All like just the pattern of things that I see in their profile makes me go, that's not a person. It should be,
yeah.
If there was a really easy button for me to be like, yeah, that appears to be a human, or that is clearly not a human, I think that would be useful.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, that is one nice thing that Proof of Humanity has that we don't, is that they can just say, okay, like this person just, if they're an attacker, they did a really bad job. Like they did not try very hard on this attack, and it's obviously an attack, and like big thumbs down. So they can weed those out. You know, we have our own process for doing stuff like that, but that's pretty cool that you can do that. Unfortunately, if you are an attacker, either a good one or a lame one or whatever, you're not going to like those are not going to get carried out. Like those accounts are not going to carry over into BrightID to where people can like downvote them. So it's like, so unfortunately you can't take the graph of like lame fake Twitter accounts and overlay it on BrightID and say, okay, let's, but the game you were talking about is a way that you could do that, like that, the meta node game where you go through and you say, okay, you know, I have some other information, like I happen to know, like maybe you do know how Twitter overlays onto the graph. Maybe you do know that like this region here is like equivalent to this like fake region of Twitter. And you're like, okay, these are the same scammers. We've seen them on Proof of Humanity. We've seen them in other places. I'm just going to like label this whole region of the graph as bad. So yeah, I mean, I think that sort of thing is possible.
All right, so we should wrap up here unless anyone's got a burning final question.
Yeah, so we'll wrap up. I'm pasting something. Sorry that people in on YouTube aren't going to see this, but they're talking about prediction market and the staking game, and Superfizz asked if there's is there like any thoughts on that yet, and we said no, we don't have that figured out yet, but I do have some rough thoughts that I've been working on, so I'm going to paste those in the chat for you guys to look at. But that's all I've got, so I'm going to hand it over to Pasla.
Sure. I'm going to stop recording, but before that, I want to thank everyone for joining us. It was a nice conversation. Thank you, Super. Thank you, everyone else. Who was Super's friend who we missed? Oh, Colfax. Cool. Thank you for being here. We're going to stop recording. Right after that, we need you to turn on your camera, and we want to have a group connection together. Thank you again for coming. This is